Welcome back, everybody. On the last episode, we were talking a little bit about the problem that has come into the church, and this is in every regard, but we were talking with a mind particularly to seminaries and how the law has gotten into the church and the way it operates in the world. Especially with educating its pastors and producing future ministers, either through the legal method of capitalism or the legal economic policy of Marxism, and about how the solution really, just to put it theologically, I guess, would be that of gospel, that of free gift, that of free offer and sacrifice. But I mean, the question is, of course, right, what does that look like in a practical way?
Right. Yeah. Trying to think where we begin here. I mean, so I know we said in our last episode, Connor, we were going to talk about some of the issues we see maybe in like in accredited, seminary, MDiv programs and curriculums. But and why, people who come out of those programs with a degree are no more equipped and even like not equipped in comparison to uh you know people that may pursue other routes. But I don't know if you wanted to go in that direction or not.
Yeah, I
But
mean that is basically the direction that I always take I mean, I discuss this with lots of people
mm,
constantly, and a lot of this has to do with what I was saying on the last episode. I don't remember if it was while I was recording or off the air, but I
oh
was
yeah,
mentioning
probably a mix
a,
of both. Yeah.
probably a mix of both, a little bit of whispers that Transcendent Truth Media and the people who work on it are also working on things we do not publicly declare. They're not secret, but they're not
Mm,
they're not one-to-one ratio connected to it. They're not exactly on the website. Um,
mhm.
and a
But
lot
what
of
are
this, oh, go
I,
on.
I'm sorry, go on. Yeah, I cut you off. What were you
Oh,
gonna say?
I was just saying a lot of this does have to do with alternative modes of education and training and producing
Mhm.
pastors in different ways that, yes, admittedly, it skirts seminaries, it skirts accreditations, it skirts credentialism. But what it does is it focuses on the essence of the thing, which is preparing pastors, really making pastors through theological education, through practical homiletical training, and of course, the credentialists would say, the people working on these projects are not qualified, and there, right there, is the problem itself. Is
Yeah.
that the faith that so many people in the church have that the church can do something is not bound up. It's not even saying it's not bound up with the Holy Spirit and his miraculous work through us. But the bigger problem is it's not even bound up with the thing itself. So no one is saying you can't teach because you're not able to teach. They're saying you can't teach because you don't have a degree,
Sure.
right? Which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and seeing this is a matter I'm really conflicted on because I've seen my own denomination, the Episcopal Church, has come up with many ways of alternative routes. I mean, they recognize this problem going back to like the 90s, the
Hmm.
1990s. Of Part of it's been a route of doing locally trained ministry.
Hmm.
Diocesan trained, not sending people off to seminary. A lot of it's involved people kind of in that second career stage of their life. You know, people who
Yeah.
had been a banker or a counselor or something, and now they're going into ministry. They've been involved in the church and they feel the calling. And by the way, a lot of those people I know several pretty good clergy that have come from that from come through it that way. But um I'm always conflicted because a lot of the programs that the diocese comes up with, the locally formed clergy model, they're not what I would consider, from what I've seen and what I've read and what I've heard, combination of all those. I mean, I was seminary route. I mean, went through seminary,
Hmm.
but they're not they're not really that good. I think the they'll bring in kind of a small variety of some people to come kind of lead and teach those courses and to form them as clergy, but they come in and it's not. I've seen some the list of resources they used, and it's not stuff that I think are that good. Um, and or it's just like, they're not, it's just not the same thing as seminary. And a lot of seminaries, for all their faults, do still, have, you go off and live in, you leave home and you live with this community and you worship together. But at least they a lot of them, for all their faults, still retain that aspect. So a lot of locally stuff I've not been like, I just don't, I have mixed feelings about. But at the same time, a lot of the accredited seminaries and going that route are just, they're, these seminaries are not what they were, these divinity schools even are not what they were 40, 50 years ago. I mean, I can't, I'm sorry, I keep circling back to ILT, but it's like, I remember the Dennis Bielfeldt, president of ILT, said, at ILT you'll get an education that Luther Seminary in Minnesota would have given you back in like the early '80s, like a good, like um a good well-rounded diet of Bible, theology, church history, pastoral care, um, and just a very enriching type of coursework, but also in ways that you'll be able to take into ministry wherever you go, ideally. And I've seen in just a lot of like mainline seminaries, kind of going back to what I first mentioned in kind of the very first parts of our interview in the last episode. A lot of them are like they're shedding all these electives. And first off, they're getting rid of all these like fun electives that someone interested in theology would like, and they're like dumbing down the curriculum because things like theology don't matter anymore. They basically relegate it, they see theology as just a kind of a overall, like, not, you know not useless, but just an enterprise that's not, it's not the same thing as like like theology. Like they driven a wedge between theology and what, and like doing ministry, as if doing ministry doesn't really have to really involve theology. It's more about
Hmm.
leadership. So a lot of them, like, I kind of made that joke, I think, in the first part of the last episode, that a lot of the seminaries are being turned into kind of like leadership institutes, right?
Oh, the
And
liberal ones, yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
for sure.
And
And my undergrad was in public admin, and like I could actually kind of like studies about, working in organizations with people and organizational theory and leadership theory. So that some of that stuff has an interest to me. Maybe this gets back into like the improper blending of the two kingdoms, but like, there definitely is an aspect of that that is important for the institutional church. But at the same time, it's like, for seminaries to really just dumb down their curriculum and their course offerings, increasingly, slowly but surely over the past 25 years, is it really, like, I think it's a symptom of a broader problem we see in the mainline. And I keep coming back from kind of the mainline Protestant standpoint, but that's my standpoint. That's
hmm
I see around me. So
See, I come from the opposite extreme. And so like the schools that I've been through don't have this kind of folding to vague leadership education problem.
mhm.
But coming from that other hyper theologically focused spectrum, I would just say it doesn't actually produce the theologians we would want. It's just not that
Okay.
good. And so like
That, tell,
go
I was
on.
about to ask you to tell me a little more on that. You're saying hyper theologically focused.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, like we don't we didn't do anything on leadership, and I don't think we need to personally. Like
Right.
I am that very focused on theology and
Mhm.
homiletics guy. I don't bother with I never took any kind of leadership class, and I'm
Right.
thank God I didn't. Because I just don't feel like that's a good waste of use very biased even in my words, use of our seminarians units of time and money. But I would say even in the theology and the homiletics that are delivered, they're not producing. things that I would allow in my pulpit. Like the people coming out of a lot of these institutions alongside me, my peers, I would not let them in my pulpit. I would not lay
And
hands on them. I would not.
why
I don't want to stand on rosters with them.
why is that? And I'm honestly
Why
asking.
is that? I think it's because the bar has been lowered.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know why it's been lowered. I know for some institutions why it's been lowered, but in other contexts, I think, I think it just has to do with the way that maybe we are forgetting that there is a higher um, level of vetting that needs to be taking place. Like as I was saying earlier, you can pass courses, you can pass a full-on MDiv degree with a 51, right?
Hmm.
You're not fit. You're not fit, sorry. But in other schools, I see people who are producing work that's not even going to pass, one of my old high school English classes, and they're getting like 80s.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is trash work. This is garbage. How is the school allowing this? And I'll complain to the schools, and usually the whole thing I get is, well, if we don't pass them, we won't have any pastors. And I'm like, you don't have any pastors. We don't have any pastors. The people we have should still be in Sunday school. Like, sorry, those are not pastors. And so
Hmm.
for me, as you were saying with the alternative methods you've seen, which so you maybe prefer this traditional academy method. I prefer the alternative method,
Hmm.
but in both cases, at least especially with the alternative method, they suck because they suck. It's not
Hmm.
because the method sucks. It's just being
Right.
executed poorly,
It,
right? So like it's
yeah.
it's like if they're using bad materials, use good materials. If
Right.
they're using bad teachers, use good teachers. So like I'm not saying that seminaries are bad per se. Like the system can produce something really good. My problem with the system is that it's inherently capitalistic, or in other cases, like for example in Stagers, it's Marxistic or socialistic,
Yeah.
where you're
Well, it's kind of a
forcing money from congregations you're funneling it into the seminary.
well, it's kind of a combination of both, right? I mean, it's the universities, they can try to fool you all, but they do operate like a business, and
Yeah.
a lot of the ideological things, yes, you'll get and this is all higher ed, especially in the social sciences and humanities, even though you're starting to see in the hard sciences are yeah, like the things that come out of postmodernism and
Hmm.
uh, you know, um, but it is interesting. I like how you said that. It's not the method; it's
The execution.
yeah, because I agree with that. I think the problem with so many seminaries is the execution, but also, I mean, kind of just to go back to um what I was saying a little bit here in the previous episode, higher education's just turned into this beast that I don't think anyone could have foreseen. I mean, no one before World War II went to college, really. A
Hmm.
few did. I mean, I guess clergy did because but no one really did. And then with the GI Bill that brings access, the Pell Grant brings access. So to higher education and for a lot of people, very understandably, it's like if there's the opportunities there, why not go educate yourself? And if people really have a true passion and aspiration to go study history in depth or go study psychology in depth
Hmm.
or whatever it is, it's I don't want to be the person that says, oh well, you can't go to college because you're not, it's like I think, so it's just as I said, kind of going back to the mixed feelings. I think higher education can be a very good thing, but it's doesn't have to be the thing.
Hmm.
This is, I mean, I'm not just talking church and seminary and theology. I'm just talking about broadly. I mean, it, we have degree inflation is a real thing. And I don't think it really, I mean, we have we have more people with bachelor's degrees walking around today, and I want to say, I don't know if I can speak for North America, at least the United States. I'm willing to bet North America. More people with bachelor's degrees walking around than there are jobs to fill them, and it's like, I don't know if a lot of those were once entry jobs, like in the 1970s. Why? it's the dangers of credentialism again.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I just think that hurts. It overall hurts. I don't say it
I
hurts.
think it hurts because it's arbitrary and it assumes a lot,
Yeah.
right? Like for example, you would assume well, here's what I'll say, right? Is that the seminaries have fallen into a method of execution, or a way of executing it that is so poor that it is not producing people you can trust, because
Mhm.
they'll have the degree, but they don't know what that degree is supposed to represent. It's kind of like trusting someone who's a medical doctor because they have their medical degree, but they don't know what they're supposed to know.
Right.
And yet they're still being produced because the government says if we continue to keep the standard as what it is, then there will be less doctors, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what I see with the institutional seminaries. But even if they were continuing to do what they were supposed to be doing, and we could trust those degrees, I would still be pretty upset, because there what we see is the church falling to capitalism, right?
Okay.
Which is, or in Europe, it's falling to socialism, because that's the way that their seminary structure runs. Um, Whereas with the alternative methods, yeah, they can be executed poorly, but both systems can. It's just that the one has not fallen into capitalism. So for me, it's kind of like how I view synods as well. People would say, Pastor Connor, we know that at heart you are a Missouri Synod man. And I would say, yes, true. So then they would say, why are you in Calc? Why are you not in the LCC? And I would say, look around at the Missouri Synod congregations. You can find ones in the Missouri Synod that are not solid, and you can find ones that are solid. You can look in Calc. You can find congregations that are not solid, and you can find congregations that are solid, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter, right? It's just the same with these two methods. You can find alternative education methods which are executed great. You can find
Mhm.
seminaries where the education is executed great. But if the
Right.
one is capitalistic, I don't think we should be going with that. But like let's take that thought though and shift it a little bit away from the educating itself and how this kind of flows out into the church, in because it flows out really in every way. It flows out in the pastors we choose to call, right? The pastors we roster, right?
Mhm.
um and the publishing industry and the podcasting industry and everything that the church does, like starting with the pastors we call, as you were saying, with this kind of degree inflation, right?
Mhm.
You go and you makes me laugh, right? Because you go and you look at these call lists of openings for, say, the LCMC or something, and you see all these requests for pastors, and it's like, sure, you're going to get a lot of ones that say MDiv required, but you're also going to see like MDiv and 9 years of experience and an STM and a doctorate, and it's like they want more and they want more and they want more.
Wow.
And the problem is that they like the first thing you're going to see on that requirement is an acronym for a degree, and it is not any kind of proper vetting. It is not even saying we need you to be a gospel preacher or we need you to confess the Book of Concord. The first thing they care about is a degree.
Yeah. Well, and I've I've seen this in real life. When it comes to, there are people that will have very impressive credentials,
Hmm.
like from top schools, that don't know how to be with people.
Yeah,
Um, you
yeah.
know, and that's a huge part, because when we look at the God ministry of Jesus and the disciples,
Hmm.
Jesus, who had no degree, as will you and I both know, and our listeners know,
Yeah,
uh,
he can't be rostered. We can't roster him.
can't roster Jesus Christ. Um, he knew how to, I'm gonna start sounding, I might start sounding mushy and whatever, but he knew how to, like, to be in community, I guess, and he knew, like, he knew how to relate to people,
Hmm.
and he
He knew more than you knew.
well, he knew more than I did. We get
Yeah,
in the static union and him being, fully divine and fully human. I'm only fully human.
yeah, he knew everything.
We get in all that, but there is so much truth to saying that the wisdom that comes by just being around people,
Hmm.
you can that just it that type of authenticness does not it cannot be replicated by a degree program.
Well, no,
um
it's that's true, but this whole thing about community, if you reframe it as other things that pastors need to have, skills, levels of understanding, etc.
mhm,
Um, when people are asking, when they're requiring firstly and foremostly an MDiv or an STM or whatever it is, what they are not saying is, I want you to understand theology necessarily.
mhm.
They are not saying, I want you to be able to preach really well. They are not saying, I want you to understand the liturgy. In fact, what they're actually doing is that they are trusting this academy to be inculcating within their students whatever they need. And in many cases, the congregations, the synods, the associations, however your church body works, are not really involved and they don't really want to be. Because it's
Right.
easier to close your eyes and pretend that whoever's running the thing has the best interests of Christ's church at heart, which is not always true, especially when careers, finances, salaries are on the line.
Mhm.
Right. And I know it's gonna offend a lot of them, it's gonna piss a lot of people off, but a lot of these individuals are pastors who did not want to be in the pastoral office, but wanted to make a career out of teaching people to be pastors. But the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is, if you're not a pastor, you have no right, you have no right to be preparing or making pastors.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there. And yeah, I mean, and there comes a certain point where the theoretical meets the practical that um needs to be met.
Well,
Um
that's every day. Like if you were to
right.
ask me, like, when in your weekly routine does the theological meet the practical? Every second of every day.
Right. And theology especially. It's yeah, I think knowing how the things we learn in a theoretical sense applies to people in a practical sense, that comes with that comes outside of the classroom. For me, I'm just
Hmm.
speak personally for me, like um I was probably not the best of preacher in my first year and a half. um
Hmm.
Preaching, probably the first 2 years. But it took a lot of being with people, because the gospel, the good news, is for people in all their various different circumstances, in
Hmm.
all their various different demographics, age ranges. I mean, teaching in two Episcopal school settings, which are very, Episcopal schools are really only in like the southern region of the US and like the very northeast region. It's I had no idea going into the ministry initially that I'd wind up in a different part of the country where and have that opportunity be in Episcopal schools. And um to be to just to be to have that ministry of presence in front of those crowds, and to know that, okay, I have to have something to say to them, and it needs to be I need to take these lectionary readings, and I need to, from these lectionary readings, in my sermon or message, bring the good news from these readings to them in whatever way I can. I mean, that's a lifelong learning
Yeah.
process. Um,
Hmm.
and it's a very enriching and very exciting and many times challenging, like, process. But it's like, um, no like higher ed institution can like teach you that. And I don't think a lot of them really can do that at the same time, though. So it's like, but I'm just kind of going on about kind of my own experience
Hmm.
with this. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I would probably lean toward Some of the better ones, I would say they do it. Not that they do it all. I mean, living in the church, being in the church, sitting under Christian ministry, simply listening to sermons, studying
Right.
on your own time. Like, for example, and I don't want to stick too much on the education itself, and but I do want to move on to, how this impacts the church, this capitalistic, credentialistic, paywall mentality of how the church has been running itself in the law, either capitalistically or socialistically. But um, like when I look at the people I went to seminary with who did not read beyond, did not listen beyond regarding podcast lectures, whatever it is,
Mhm.
out beyond and above the curriculum,
Right.
um, they're the people who I wouldn't want in my pulpit. They're the
Yeah.
people who I wouldn't want on a roster
Well,
with me, right?
I'm glad you
Whereas,
said that. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go on.
oh,
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's just whereas the people who did, they did fine. And in
Mhm.
many ways, that's really, when we look at that, we attribute a lot of that to the seminary when in reality, it's not what was done at the seminary.
Right.
It's what was done outside of it. So I would say, like, a lot of people who go to seminary end up that way, but it's not necessarily because of the seminary. Um,
Right.
but what I would say a little bit beyond that is just that I think we as the church need to be focusing on the thing itself. So if we're asking, does our pastor know enough theology? Well, ask them about their theology. Don't ask them what degree they have, right? Don't
Mhm.
ask them what method of education they had,
Right.
or are they preaching well enough? That's
Mhm.
answered in the question itself. Are they preaching well enough? You don't have to ask what's in their degree or what's in their so it right. Even if you go even with the best education system, if you're deaf, it's not going to affect you, right? So at some level, this is synergistic, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said about Brian. Like a moment ago, you said with the people who go beyond the curriculum, that the people you knew, it seemed like they really had a true calling because they had this passion that needed to be constantly
Yeah,
fed. Like they want,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, the seminary course here I took was good, it was good here, but I want to branch, I want to read this Bible commentary. Yeah, it's not on the assigned readings for this class I have in seminary, but I
right.
want to read this bible, I want to listen to this, this theological issue that I still need to find where I am with it. There's a debate on this podcast with these two people arguing these two different points of view, right?
Yeah.
All those things, like exploring those interests farther, those really do speak a lot to a person's calling. Now that you bring it up, when you said that, um, I mean, I was kind of reminded of my own seminary experience where I felt like a lot, and I've said this before in public, so I mean, if it's going to come back to haunt me, it wouldn't be from this. There were people who, like, classmates, seminary and stuff, who it seemed like they didn't really care about a lot of it. Like
Oh
it,
yeah,
and
a lot of them.
I was very surprised by it. And like, y'all can listen to my podcast on my church history podcast. I'll protest too
Hmm.
much. But I've said this a couple times, but like I basically went to an ELCA seminary for the most part because the Episcopal seminary I went to was partnered and shared facilities stuff. And it was a seminary, had some good things about it, had some great faculty, but I
Hmm.
noticed and made some dear friends that I still, lean on, and they lean on me, and it's great. But a lot of classmates I know were just not into any of that. They were not interested in exploring anything farther.
Right. Or they assumed that the curriculum gave them enough.
Or they assume that the curriculum gave them enough, or like that the professor knows best or something.
Uh-huh.
And it was kind of sad to see, and I see like a lot of them, like they were kind of like just, and I think this kind of speaks more broadly because for some, I think culturally, we can't just because we're talking about seminaries and theological education, we're all affected by the culture around us, and I do
Of
think
course.
some of those some of that you see in kind of this broadly in higher education. It's like people, it was, you see this all over in higher education. People in um very good schools, pursuing, getting, degrees that are, and they're, that really have no interest that much in the subject matter um beyond the curriculum they got and how well they did um in their class. I mean, it was really, I mean, I saw, yeah, I'm just, just summarize, I saw a lot of just people that were very indifferent to a lot of things that I think truly, matter. I don't know. um
Yeah. Well, and so like as this issue flows out into the church, it flows out first in the pastoral offices, right? So we're getting tons of pastors who, sure, they did what was given to them in the seminary, but that's all they did, right?
mhm,
And even if that seminary was the best seminary you've ever seen, that does not necessarily mean that they paid attention very well. That does not
right.
necessarily mean that they read above that standard, or listened above that standard, or engaged above that standard. It doesn't even mean that they remember anything that they learned,
Mhm,
right? And so the problem with credentialism is it assumes a hell of a
right.
lot. Right.
Mhm,
And so we start calling people based upon a degree that they have earned 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, rather than, and this is the thing that's so stupid to me. You can have a Lutheran pastor who is tried and true, who comes from certain associations which do not have higher levels of credential requirements. For example, Calc doesn't, the
mhm,
LCMC doesn't. They don't have very super high credential requirements for their congregations to call pastors. You can have a Lutheran pastor who's been pastoring with, theoretically, like hypothetically, no degree at all for 40 years, doing an amazing job, right?
mhm,
Proven. His theology is proven. His homiletics are proven. His pastoral care is proven, right? And yet he will go and apply to get a call at a different church, and they will not accept him because he doesn't have an MDiv.
right.
And instead, they'll call a first call pastor who doesn't know anything really,
Doesn't, right. Yeah.
just because he has the degree. Like, so this is really what I would just call brainless arbitration. And
Yeah.
and this doesn't just happen in the pastoral office, but it happens with books. It happens like book publishing. It happens with podcasting. But
Yeah.
it's not just the credentialism, it's the capitalism again there coming into these things, right?
Mhm,
Because in a lot of these issues, it's kind of like, well, did you give your due to the system? Are you normative? And I see online all the time with people I know them like belittling and insulting pastors, theologians, writers, podcasters, whatever it is, people who don't have a degree from the
mhm,
right school, or don't have the right degree from whatever school they went to, or didn't go to school, or, and so to me, it's like, who cares, right? Do they know their stuff? Are they performing well? And are they doing it in the spirit of the gospel, of free offer and as
mhm,
gift, right? But everyone is so like in these church systems, they're so focused on the law. They're so focused on capitalism and money and career and
mhm,
job markets and
right.
whatever.
And the thing is, a lot of them, I think you're right. I think a lot of them wouldn't realize, though, that's what their focus is on, though. Like,
No, of course they wouldn't.
they would see, like, well, the degree, there's such a trust in, of course, institutions, and I guess, I don't know, legacy institutions,
For sure.
legacy seminaries. And so there's just that assumption that, you know, if they've gone the route of the MDiv from place, they've been vetted, and they've really been, that place is a big determinant of how they will be as a pastor. And you're right, that's not necessarily always correct. And I've seen it very practically in my own life, where there will be clergy who, there's clergy who are hired into great positions that could be great opportunities, for a minister who's equipped to do it, but they're hired based on their resume. And a resume, yeah, I think resumes matter on an end, but also it can be very superficial, because it can just be, well, they have these degree from these impressive sounding places. And for me, like, for me, being someone who has those degrees, but they're not from, like, what the eyes of the world see as like super impressive places, necessarily. I mean, decent schools I went to, but, um, yeah, I can see, like, I can see just the fakeness of that, and how
Yeah.
what really matters is the pastoring and shepherding from, I mean, someone who like I like the example you gave, 40 years of a pastor who didn't like go through the hoops of higher education versus someone who's fresh out of seminary. Yeah, if I'm going to be, you know, on my dying bedside, I'm going to want the person who's, not the first year out of seminary at my bedside. I mean, but most of the time, I mean, it also depends on the person, and but it comes from things outs. It's education. It may matter to some extent, but there's so much more to what goes into a person and their calling and their vocation,
Mm-hmm.
then we cannot reduce it to, do they have this credential or not, and that will say everything. I mean, that I
Yeah.
completely agree with.
And what this is like all really coming down to, and we're gonna close in just a second because we're on like 3 minutes on the
Yeah, I know
clock.
you're right where.
But
Yeah,
the whole issue here is it's not to say kind of like as the IFB, the fundamentalist Baptist would say, like if you go to seminary, we don't trust you. But it's also not to say we trust you because you went to seminary. It's we trust you because your work is good, right? So you pick up a book. Is the book good? Let the book determine its own worth. Is the podcast good? Let the podcast determine its own worth.
right.
Is the pastor good? Let the pastor determine his own worth, right? Not by his opinion, not by your opinion, not by the degree he has, not by the lack of degree, but by his performance in that office,
Hmm.
right? Like that's the whole thing there. Can you do a thing? Show me you can do the thing. That's it.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And yeah, this is a discussion again. I think it's gonna have to, because we're already seeing uh the old, I mean, in this, I keep going back to the broader picture of just higher education in general and society in general. There's going to be a reckoning at, we're already seeing it, that people are seeing, the gatekeepers that we, the people that we ascribed this this status of determining who is fit and unfit. It's not that simple. It's not that simple, and we're decades into now the information age, and people being able to be learned, informed by a variety of things, and people even before that, there were so many things about a person's life uh, that went into that, besides just, if they went the right route of getting the credentials that they did. The people, and some of the people in my life who have had the biggest impact on me, and have really, uh shared the love and grace of God with me in my life, have it's been totally outside of the context of, you know uh what someone can offer me because of their, you know supposed expertise or credentials. So um and that's the truth. That, and you go back to the apostolic ministry and the ministry of Jesus. There was not.
Which is uncredentialed. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
in the
there was
seminary.
there was none of that there.
No.
So
Well, we're in the last few seconds. So do you have you have one sentence phrase you can close us off with there, Drew?
one sense. Oh gosh, how to pare this down to one
We've only
sentence.
got like 10,
Uh,
10, 15 seconds.
Jesus loves you, and he doesn't care if you have a degree or not.
Amen. All right. Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you, Pastor Christiansen. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time on the podcast. God bless you all.